Welcome into Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Just over 24 hours until the NHL trade deadline. Welcome into DFO Live, streaming live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. I'm Tyler Bertuzzi. He is our NHL insider, Frank Saravalli, and he has had a lot to dig up over the last 24 hours. Frank, the news just does not stop rolling in. GMs are getting antsy. They're not waiting until the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even so much a question of who's left. It's going to be a question of who still needs players by Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, let's take a look. There's been a lot of players moved and a lot of first-round picks involved in those trades as well. This list just keeps on growing in terms of players who have been moved with a first-rounder attached somewhere in the deal, and we'll see just how many more could potentially be added to this list in the next 24 hours. The most recent name is Tyler Bertuzzi. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but it's not the only significant piece of news that the Boston Bruins have made today. They acquire Bertuzzi and then quickly after announce a brand new extension for their superstar winger, David Pastrnak. So let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock and dig into that 8-year, $11.25 million AAV extension for Pastrnak, a story that was lingering a little bit, but now won't go into the summer at all. Pastrnak will stay a member of the Bruins. Frank, do you like the piece of work here from Don Sweeney and the Bees?
Don't like, love. I mean, this is truly an incredible player signed to, I think, what ends up being a really reasonable deal when it's all said and done. He gets $90 million to throw in his piggy bank on top of the 43 that he will have earned at the end of this season in his career. That makes him a very rich man, but on top of that, he's one of the true elite goal scorers in the NHL. The way that he scored goals this year, 42 in 60 games, as you can see, has been incredibly special, and he's such a big part of what the Boston Bruins do, not just now, but also for the future, because everyone sort of was wondering what would happen if this ends up being the last run for Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. Getting David Pastrnak done really signals that with some of the other pieces that they have, Brad Marchand, Hampus Lindholm, Linus Ullmark has played incredible, that the window to win is going to stay open in Beantown for a long time. And really, Tyler, I think when you look deeply into how the Bruins have navigated this deadline, this all came in concert. It's no secret that with the NHL's tagging space increasing on March 1st, just on Wednesday, that they had increased flexibility to get this done. And it comes sort of as a signal just on the heels of the Tyler Bertuzzi deal that I think the Boston Bruins are probably done shopping. And they waited till they got all of their work done and then boom, put pen to paper, get Pastrnak done, and to get it announced out there to really take the heat off of this team and some of the pressure with that extension that now has the Boston Bruins absolutely swimming with where they are in the standings and what they're looking like as an absolute juggernaut heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, I know you are going to sleep very well on Friday night. Don Sweeney is going to sleep very well tonight. I love this move as sort of the cherry on top of everything else they've done, like you said, and it just ends any sort of drama or lingering storylines as this team goes down the stretch, looks to potentially set some records in terms of how many points they could put up. And then also looks to go into the playoffs. You won't have any of this. Ooh, is David Pastrnak? Why didn't it get done? No drama, just focused on winning, and the last dance vibes continue for the Boston Bruins. Or maybe the last dance vibes end with a guy like Pastrnak now locked up. And like you said, Frank, the window staying open. Let's talk about the trade they made right before signing Pastrnak. There was, a lot of talk. The Tyler Bertuzzi thing went back and forth. We heard, 2-3 weeks ago, they're open to moving him. Then about a week ago, it was like, actually, they might hold on to him here. They end up dealing him to Boston because, they get a pretty good price here with a conditional 2024 first-round pick going the other way. Detroit did keep a little bit of money for the rest of this season as well, right around $2 million. Frank, does Tyler Bertuzzi not just seem like the perfect fit for the Boston Bruins?
He's Brad Marchand light is essentially what Tyler Bertuzzi is. He's got some edge. He competes hard, and he also has skill. 30 goals last season, 62 points in 68 games. He's someone that I think is an incredibly valuable piece. And you know what I'm most looking forward to with Tyler Bertuzzi is what does he look like when the lights are brightest in the Stanley Cup playoffs? I think this guy has unsung hero written all over him for a team like the Boston Bruins, someone that you can pencil in now as a gamer for this team when push comes to shove. I think it's such an outstanding fit for this team moving forward. And I wonder, maybe, just maybe, would they have the ability to keep a player like this for next season if those guys end up moving on like we think they will? It's going to be difficult to do because they have so much committed to next year already. You worry about that after the fact. And you load up this year, especially with the news on Thursday that Taylor Hall was added to LTIR. So Hall's going to be out for a bit. And also Nick Foligno is banged up. You saw the injury that he had. The Bruins have found a way to navigate this almost perfectly. They've added in almost every key situation. We just talked about getting the Pastrnak deal done, improve on the back end with Dmitry Orlov, who has literally looked like Bobby Orlov at the way that he scored already to start his Bruins tenure. And then a nice piece in Garnet Hathaway at the deadline as well, someone that contributes in a lot of different areas. To add Tyler Bertuzzi is just kind of the cherry on top.
Yeah, it really does feel that way. A busy morning for Don Sweeney. Quickly, can we get this from the Red Wings perspective? Does this signal a bigger sell-off maybe coming when you look at Hronek dealt yesterday, Bertuzzi today, or could Steve Yzerman maybe look to add with these assets he's now found?
Yeah, I know it was a disastrous weekend for the Red Wings and their playoff chances, and maybe Steve Yzerman read into that more than maybe the rest of us did. You look at the Hronek deal to Vancouver, that shocked me to see a player of that magnitude and what he meant to that team to move on sort of that quickly, followed in close order by Bertuzzi. It certainly seems to be a signal from them as to what could come next, but if you're holding your breath for Jacob Vrana, doesn't seem necessarily like that will happen, as their coach Derek Lalonde saying at practice on Thursday that Vrana will be a healthy scratch as a coach's decision, not for trade-related reasons. I still think Vrana has an opportunity to go if the Red Wings are willing to retain the portion of his salary that would be corresponding to a buyout in the summer, which is where it seems like that is heading. So Red Wings, I thought they might be in the market to maybe add a little bit more after the Hronek trade. Are you dumping Hronek to then bring in a different type of defenseman? I was thinking Colton Parayko, or, in the moment, is that a Jakob Chychrun type of addition that Steve Yzerman could make with those assets? It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case.
Oh, look at how beautifully you teed me up for the third segment here, Frank. Tease in the Jakob Chychrun thing.
Almost like I've done this before.
Yeah, almost like we can see the topic bar at the bottom as well. But I wondered the same thing. I tweeted, I said, oh man, does this Hronek deal line up perfectly with Steve Yzerman going and nabbing Jakob Chychrun? That didn't end up being the case. Chychrun got dealt almost immediately after, but it was to the Ottawa Senators. Brent Wallace is going to join us in a little bit to really dive into this from a Senators perspective. But let's look at that deal from a Yotes, that return, a first, a second, and a second. And I know that 2024 second could potentially become a first if things break a certain way. But Frank, I look at this and I go, really, Arizona? You waited 18 months, kept this guy on the market for 18 months to get this?
I reacted the same way, and I think a lot of other people did around the league. I made this joke on the DFO rundown earlier today with our co-host Jason Greger, and that was that the price that Bill Armstrong had set for this player, so much bravado and bluster as we've dealt with this topic for the last 18 months, that when push came to shove, a couple days before the deadline, his price buckled like my will when driving past a fast food restaurant. And that's just the truth. The talk was 2 first-round picks and a grade A prospect, or a first-round pick equivalent, and some other kind of prospect. However you wanted to chop it up, it was always 2 first-round picks. And look, I get that the Coyotes are going to spin it and say that they're really happy to get Ottawa's pick, but the way the Sens have been playing of late, and maybe the shot in the arm that Jakob Chychrun gives them, they have an outside shot to make the playoffs. So you're looking at a pick in the teens, and that's probably better than, some of the other picks that were on the table in terms of first-round selections and the conversations that Arizona had ongoing. But the fact that they weren't willing to retain ultimately on Chychrun and were not willing to take contracts back in return for him, I think in this case ended up being a big difference maker in where he went. And Ottawa just waits until the last second possible. They smoke out the Arizona Coyotes, a really nice piece of business. But for the Coyotes, I don't think they're done quite yet as their sell-off continues. The obvious pieces are, up front with Nick Bjugstad, maybe on the back end with a depth piece and Troy Stetcher. But the big thing for me, as I've called this wild card week, is look out for the Arizona Coyotes and a couple other pieces. Nick Schmaltz, Lawson Krause, 2 guys signed with term. When you look at the prices paid for some of the big name guys that have been out there with term over these last couple weeks, they would seem to be able to get a lot for those players. They'd need to either take on money or somehow make it work, because there are cap floor considerations according to our friends at capfriendly.com.
Yeah, everyone else worried about the cap ceiling, and the Yotes worried about the cap floor. Of course, just quickly, the conditions on that Chychrun deal, for those wondering, from Cap Friendly. The first round pick in 2023 is top 5 protected, and if that condition is met, then the pick turns into an unprotected first rounder in 2024, and that second rounder in 2024 can become a first if the Senators make it to the Eastern Conference Final this year. So those are the conditions on the deal and how the picks could potentially change. But what won't change is the fact that Jakob Chychrun is a member of the Ottawa Senators. We'll have more on that fit in just a second, like I said, with Brent Wallace. Let's talk about another team in the Eastern Conference, Frank, the Pittsburgh Penguins. We had heard that GM Ron Hextall was kind of itching to add a forward. There were, whispers maybe Besser, whispers maybe JT Miller. It ends up being Mikael Granlund from the Nashville Predators, who goes to the Penguins in exchange for a second-round pick, which also lines up with what Hextall said about a month ago when he was like, I don't know if I want to move my first-round pick. Do you like the fit of Granlund in Pittsburgh?
So I do, way more than it seems the Pittsburgh market does. I'm not nearly as down on it as Pens fans are. And the reason for that is I've watched really closely the way that Granlund plays. This guy's a grinder. He competes hard. He's basically Patrick Hornquist in his absolute prime. And if you're a Penguins fan, you know how valuable Hornquist was, except he has more skill than Patrick Hornquist. And so Mikael Granlund can touch just about every facet of your team. Power play, penalty kill. He scores at even strength. He's on pace for 51 points this year. And he's never been a super fast player. So at his age, I'm not worried about the age curve as much as I would be someone else. This isn't, to me, a guy that really lost a step. The reason the return was where it was is because he has 2 more years on his contract at $5 million per. And so Penguins fans have been griping for weeks now. We need help on our bottom 6. Granlund pushes someone from the top 6 down to the bottom 6, which should improve it. I know that they're upset that they lost Kasperi Kapanen for nothing. He didn't have a lot of trade value, or else they would have traded him. Teddy Bluger is a smart player, but I made the joke earlier. He couldn't score into the ocean this season. Useful guy, but at his cap hit wasn't, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze this season. And Brock McGinn, who was on waivers, is someone that you can just put right back into the lineup potentially. So the Penguins find a way to make this work. And as you said, they don't give up a first-round pick. I don't see a lot of reasons to gripe at this trade if you're a Penguins fan. I think this team is better now. They're going to be better for next season with Mikael Granlund in the lineup. And, okay, so you're upset that they traded for a guy that's 31. The whole team's old. What's the difference of adding more players that are old?
That's a good point. They got a 3rd-round pick from Vegas in that Teddy Bluger deal as well. So, Ron Hextall keeps an asset in this sort of transaction, and in a way, upgrades from Bluger to Granlund. And I like the point you made, too, about how he could maybe shift pieces down in the lineup as well. Do you get the sense the Pens are done, Frank?
It's certainly capped out at this moment in time, and I don't think they have any other flexibility to really trade other or waive other players to create more. I guess maybe you could ship out a Jason Zucker, for instance, but I think if you're trading Zucker to then get another piece that could kind of do what Zucker does, I don't know that that really helps you either.
Fair enough. Let's get back more into that Jakob Chychrun deal. We should talk about it more because, again, it feels like we've waited years to discuss it. Let's bring in Brent Wallace for the All 32. You can find Brent Wallace 3 times a week with his co-host Jason York and Bobby Ryan on Coming in Hot. Wally, really appreciate you hopping on the show here. I'm going to start with the big name, Jakob Chychrun. Why is he the right fit for this Senators team?
Great question, Tyler. Because he shoots left and they need a right-handed shot D. So the question is, where's he going to play? And they skated today in New York, but Jakob Chychrun didn't skate. So they haven't said where he's going to fit in the lineup. Either it's Jake Sanderson, who's the rookie, moves over, or it's going to be Chychrun that moves over to the right side. I suspect because he's a veteran, it'll be Chychrun playing the right. But in that top 4, he was much needed. They needed a top 4 D. They needed someone who's got some strength and size, and they got that in Jakob Chychrun. And he's a local kid, and I think that adds a little bit more value. I know Jakob Chychrun in the summer, they worked really hard to try and get something done, and he wanted to come back to Ottawa. It just wasn't right at the time, and they waited him out, and they finally made it happen.
Yeah, Wally, you were mentioning waiting it out, and I think that was such a huge part of this deal, making it happen for Pierre Dorion, the patience that he showed to finally get it over the finish line. But I was curious from an off-ice perspective. You mentioned local kid, spends his summers there. His grandfather lives there. His sister lives in Ottawa as well. How important is it for the Sens and sort of where they're going and all of the excitement that's been building in that market, new ownership coming in, potentially new arena down the line, to get a player that really wants to be there?
Absolutely. And he's 24. He turns 25 at the end of the month. So he fits right into that window. He's signed for 2 more years at $4.6 million cap hit. He fits in all the spots, except I like him to shoot right, but that just doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. So where he fits in the lineup is really, really good. Like, he fills all the boxes. And so that's exciting for this group. They're really feeling they've got something to build towards here. This isn't necessarily a playoff team this year. As we know, they're 5 points out. It's a long shot at best to make the playoffs, but they're on a roll, obviously. But this is, I think, for next year and the year after, when this group is ready to win, I think he'll be ready to play in that spot. And so that's exciting for this group to have that top 4 right now. Is a big deal for Pierre Dorion. And the players were asking. We remember earlier this week, Derek Brassard, who plays his 1000th game tonight in New York, is saying, listen, we need help. We want somebody. Help us get over perhaps that hump and push towards a playoff spot. And Pierre Dorion did that.
Yeah, I even liked his quote today, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but kind of saying, I owed it to Claude Giroux. I told him I'd get something done, and Pierre Dorion showing he's a man of his word. Do you think this Sens team could get up to anything else in the next 24 or 26 hours here, Wally?
See, yeah, that one's interesting. I think they will, but I think it's going to be small. I think they need to move some players out possibly, or find new homes for certain players in perhaps their minor league system. But I don't know that there's a lot more that they can do up front. Perhaps with the addition of a D, maybe they move somebody out that's either been in the organization for a bit and there's no fit for them. But I'm not sure it's anything that's significant. That the Cam Talbot thing is interesting. And Frank, I don't know if you've heard anything recently, but I don't know what's going to happen with Cam Talbot. That's the big one to me. Do they move him out with a team that's on perhaps the precipice of making a playoff run here?
Yeah, I don't get the sense, Wally, that they're going to try and cut their team's knees out, especially after adding Chychrun. Yeah. It depends on the return. I'd say even just looking at the return that Columbus got for Korpisalo, just a third, and he's been way better this year than Talbot has, not to mention doesn't have the current injury concerns that's sort of been hovering around Talbot, that I don't even know that the push to make something like that happen is going to be worth it long term. Yep. One quick final question for you. It hasn't been talked about a lot, but how big of an impact do you think the Sens' ability to trade Nikita Zaitsev's contract, just from a cash perspective, given all that's going on with the ownership change, really helped this Chychrun deal become a reality or a possibility, given what Pierre Dorion has been forced to juggle?
Yeah, and I think it was imperative, Frank. It's a very good point. Zaitsev was making 4.5. Now the Sens retained some of that salary, if I'm not mistaken. So they had cash freed up. And listen, at $4.6 million for a D-man who's a top 4, it's a very good price. Who's 24 years old. So all that being said, that I think the Nikita Zaitsev deal had to happen for anything else to transpire. And so that's the interesting part. The other interesting part is Ottawa gave up nothing off their roster or in their future prospect pool. They said they weren't going to, and Bill Armstrong seemed to be adamant he wanted to get a player or two. That just didn't happen. And so when Bill Armstrong, I think, started to see all the D-men move, he had to make some choice, and it just obviously wasn't what he was hoping to get.
Yeah, and so Wally, to your point, the Sens, they add Alex DeBrincat and Jakob Chychrun, 2 players that if they want could be with them for a long time without having to take a piece off their roster. Pretty tidy work.
Yeah. Huge
100%.
deals. Like everybody talks about the draft picks. Well, as we've always heard, we don't know what's going to happen with those draft picks. So you actually want to build now. And I think finally GMs are starting to admit that this is the right way to go to build, especially in a cap system, is to build towards winning now with the group you've got.
Yeah, and with Chychrun as well, like that contract too, just so affordable. So it could prove to be a great value if he continues to grow now that he's in a market and a spot that he actually wants to be in. Brent, love the analysis. Again, coming in hot. You can find them on YouTube with Bobby Ryan and Jason York. Look forward to you guys breaking this all down throughout the week. Wally, thanks for hopping on.
Anytime, boys.
There is so much news. There's been so much happening, Frank. Let's talk a little bit about a piece that came yesterday right as we were wrapping up our show, and that's the Dylan Larkin extension. What did you like about the work that Steve Yzerman did getting their centerman locked up?
Well, I like that he was just continuing to grind. I think everyone knew that Dylan Larkin wasn't going anywhere, and that ultimately what really helped push this forward was the Bo Horvat deal getting done on Long Island. I've said it before. People didn't believe it then. Larkin has a higher offensive upside and ceiling than Bo Horvat does, and that's going to result in more dollars. And so Horvat got 8.5. Larkin gets 8.7. I think the two sides, the initial sort of volley from Larkin's camp was 8 years, $71 million to match his number. Obviously, Yzerman didn't go for that. They settle at 69.6. Just seems to be a deal that makes sense for both team and player. Dylan Larkin doesn't need to go out and chase it this summer. He can stay in Michigan where he's always been, pure Michigan, youth hockey, playing U.S. National Development Program in Ann Arbor, then continuing on to play at University of Michigan and now the Detroit Red Wings. It was always the Red Wings for Larkin, and it was always going to be the Red Wings for Larkin.
We have a chance to add, or we're going to do some more hashtag Ask DFO questions coming up in garbage time because I promised the YouTube chat that if they had some questions, I'll fire them your way. But first, Frank, let's get into our PointsBet daily bets for today. Hit the over in Toronto and Edmonton last night, which was very nice. Tonight, I got a couple other things I like, starting with a shot prop for the Buffalo Sabres. Dylan Cousins, that line is set at 2.5. You're giving me even money. He's hit it in 3 of his last 5. I like taking the workhorse from Whitehorse to hit his shot prop this evening, simply because you're giving me a plus money payout, or an even money payout, I should say, on something that's happened in 3 of the last 5 games. Also, over between Dallas and Chicago. This number is set at an even 6. The Stars saw the over actually saw this number hit yesterday when they played the Arizona Coyotes. Now, without Jake Ottinger in net, I like the chance for a little bit more offense here. The Stars on the second of back-to-back, maybe some sloppy-er hockey, and they've hit 6 goals in 3 of their last 4. Give me over 6 at -115 between Dallas and Chicago, and the Cousins shot prop at +100. And that brings us to garbage time, Frank. So 2 things are going to happen here. The chat's going to ask you questions. You're going to give us insight, and that means I have to read embarrassing YouTube names. Turd Ferguson is in, all caps. Please ask Frank if Kevin Cheveldayoff has lost his phone. Frank, what are the Jets going to get up to?
Oh, I think the Jets are in the market for a defenseman now, and I pegged it as a gritty defenseman, and that's not a pun on the Flyers and gritty, but I do think Ivan Provorov would be a fantastic fit for that team. I think they're looking for an upper echelon guy, and I think part of the calculus for the Jets is they have to get a lot of their work done to remake their team in the trade deadline period because they don't have a lot of success signing free agents. So it's not a knock on anyone. Provorov played his junior hockey in Manitoba for the Wheat Kings. I think he would take that defense core that is skilled and has been led by Josh Morrissey, that doesn't really have a ton of bite and toughness to it, and add a competitive edge that I could see them desperately needing. The Flyers are open to moving Provorov, and the reason I bring him up is Kevin Cheveldayoff. We know going back a couple years to when he traded Patrick Laine that they had engaged in discussion about Provorov going back to then.
Pringle McDingle. Frank, are the Leafs done?
I am not certain about that, and I would say that I think if you're looking at the balance of this team right now, they're a little bit heavy on the defense side. 9 bona fide NHL defensemen, that's a logjam. And I think what ends up happening is, the old adage, you can never have too many defensemen for a Stanley Cup run. The problem is when you have 3 guys that are legitimately good and shouldn't be out of the lineup sitting as healthy scratches when they could be playing on another team in a playoff chase, that doesn't necessarily make everyone happy, especially the few guys that you traded for. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, with a little bit of cap space that they have left and accounting for the fact that they need to sign Matt Nyes out of the University of Minnesota, that they trade a defenseman to, add in another forward body in addition to Nyes, but we'll see.
Brian Curley, any word, even if it's highly unlikely, could the Habs do anything?
So the Habs, I think my eye is on them to be one of those creative teams in the next 24 hours. They're antsy to do something. I don't think as much interest as there has been in Josh Anderson that the Habs have any interest in moving him. They've turned down some massive offers for him before. It's really a shame what's happened to the Habs this year with the injuries that they've had. Joel Edmondson and his back, they could have gotten something for him. Sean Monahan at center. Like, you think about the way his season started, 17 points in 25 games. He was trending towards being a significant deadline addition for someone, and unfortunately just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So will someone pay a low price at the end to take a gamble on Monahan? Maybe, and I'm sure the Habs would oblige, and they're in a good spot because they already got a first-round pick to take on his contract. But I don't see any big swings from Montreal coming, but they're always out there and thinking ahead of a couple permutations ahead. And so they've been a fun team to try and keep track of.
Yeah, they really have been. We'll squeeze in one more here. Actually, I like this one from Jared, but I'm going to spin it a little bit. He asked for your favorite move so far. I'm going to take that as, which GM would you give an MVP of deadline week award to right now?
Deadline
Maybe
week.
A better
I'm gonna call it deadline period, and I'll throw a few names at you. It's hard to combat anything that Don Sweeney has done in Boston. The volume and significance of the trades that they've made has been pretty impressive. I'm actually way more intrigued, and I think my eyes have been opened, and a bunch of people have, to the teams that have been selling. Doug Armstrong making a real definitive statement, trading away Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly and also Ivan Barbashev. So they got a haul for those pieces. I love what the Washington Capitals have done. They make a definitive statement, trading away their pieces, although the Sandin one kind of threw me through a loop because I think Sandin was about to be exposed as a healthy scratch in the playoffs, and they gave up a first-round pick for him when they probably could have traded less for him in the summer if they really wanted him. But that's a side story. So Kyle Dubas and his also courage to remake this team, trading out 30% of it, has also been a really significant storyline as well. So those are 4 guys that stand out to me just off the top of my head.
There you go. And if you're in the chat asking about a team, we don't have time, but luckily for you, on today's episode of the DFO Rundown, Frank and Jason Gregor went through literally all 32 teams. The podcast is over an hour long, but if you go in the description, we've time-stamped when each division starts. You can quickly get to your team and hear what Frank is hearing about them and what they could do in the next 24 hours. Also, a reminder, tomorrow, the show is starting at the same time, but it is going for 4 hours, noon Eastern time. Tomorrow, it is our trade deadline special, brought to you by Athletic Brewing. Frank's going to be around up in the corner in his little insider cam box. I'll be there hosting, as well as Pete Blackburn, Nick Alberga, Matt Larkin, Mike McKenna, and Jay Rosehill, Stephen Ellis as well. If we need some prospect breakdowns, there is going to be a lot, hopefully, to discuss tomorrow. I think there's still some moves to be cooked up, and I mean, we'll have a lot of fun regardless.
There actually is one little move to add in now. The Arizona Coyotes have announced that they've acquired Jakob Chychrun's contract.
Jacob Voracek.
Jakob Voracek's contract. Too many Jacobs, too many Arizona Coyotes. I'll tell you why this is significant. We just talked about this. Nick Schmaltz, Lawson Krause. That cap hit is really important for Arizona if they want to move any of those other players. So Voracek's contract, mostly covered by insurance, that ensures that no matter what Arizona does before the end of this season, whether it's Schmaltz and Krause that end up being on the move, that they can pull something like that off.
There you go. Maybe a setup move to something else. The Yotes, one of the many teams to watch in the next 24 hours. Big shout out to everyone who is active asking their questions in the chat. We hope to see you all tomorrow for the 4-hour marathon live show. Until then, keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com for all your deadline related needs. We'll chat tomorrow.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.